Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic, let's do it. People who helped or got someone sent to prison. What's your story? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Talked to my dad on the phone for the first time in 6 years to lure him to the spot where the arrest took place. I was 17 years old at the time. Pulled out of school with zero notice I would be doing this. Sex crimes from 15 years ago and a year-long trial. Bastard was sentenced to 11 years. Would do it again in a heartbeat. F that guy. An older friend told me this story. On a camping trip, he discovered that his brother had been molesting his own children for years. On the ride back, he thought of nothing other than killing his brother. He thought of his own family, his wife and 5 kids without provider. He lost a night of sleep over it and then decided to kill him, but realized that doing so would punish his own kids. He called his brother's wife, and she told him that it was okay. He only did it when he was drunk. She was afraid for the kids if he left. He drove to the police station and informed on his brother. They arrested him, and the kids told the police everything. His brother got 17 years in prison, and my friend took care of his family the entire time. When he got out, kids were grown except for one. My friend adopted her 15 so she could finish high school. 2 weeks after he got out of prison, he got into a car accident and broke his leg. They discovered he had bone cancer and was dead in less than a month. For 17 years, my friend took care of 2 families and never looked back. He told me this story last year, and after he smiled and said, it would have been easier to just kill him. When I was a kid, Mom had an abusive boyfriend that she kept going back to. One night, he threatened our lives via text, so we braced all the doors and windows in the house. Didn't expect him to climb up the side of the house and break into a second-floor window. While he's going through, trashing the house and beating the shit out of Mom, my sister and I were hidden in my room on the phone with police. When they showed up, knocked on the door, he goes, "Who the is it?" I flew out of my room, unlocked the door, and threw it open. It's the fucking cops. I've never seen a man's face lose color so fast. Mom didn't press charges and abandoned us for 2 weeks a month later to leave state with him. Hopefully I can wrap this enormous story into a short paragraph. My gang member best friend died on New York 4 years ago. Chris had a small get-together for New Year's and was sold a bag of fentanyl, which he believed was actually ecstasy. He died after checking on his vomit in his sleep. That would have happened at around 4 a.m. The rest of the party, who remained, had no idea he was dead, but all of us became sick and threw up, thinking we had a tummy bug, 5 of us. One girl did end up in the hospital, but she was fine. So fast forward a little bit, and people who were at his party start getting murdered. Same town, all various different gruesome deaths. One of which was a Cambodian Uber driver who was found in a trough chopped up. He wasn't actually there. Police had our phones tapped and were building a case. Turns out Chris's gang member associates had a list of names and wanted to eliminate every person on that list for suspicion of foul play. Who sold him the drugs? Everyone will pay type thing. I was on that list, and a detective told me I almost died about 6 times after reading our phone info. Anyway, plot twist, the guy killing everyone had this nasty bitch of a sidekick, and that sidekick was the one who sold my mate the drugs, and indeed it was foul play. And indeed I was the first out of around 40 people on live television to stand on the dock and say, yes, I saw her sell him these drugs, and look those evil bastards in the eye, which gave me chills. They got life, or close to it. My ex-partner was very violent, controlling, and abusive. I was with him for 18 months, and during that time, he AR'd me multiple times and almost killed me twice by strangling me. I finally managed to leave with the help of some friends while he was at work. I just wanted to be done with the situation, but he started stalking me and threatening me. I sent a cease and desist letter through a solicitor for him to stop, but he ramped it up. I then went to the police about the stalking and harassment At that point, I told him the whole story. Anyway, long story short, it was 3.5 years of hell while the police and Crown Prosecution Service investigated. He breached 3 different restraining orders, tried to open 6 different credit cards in my name, continued to stalk me, and try to smear my name with my friends to get at me. It finally went to court, and after a 6-day trial, he was sentenced to 9 years, 6 months in prison, of which he had to serve 2/3. I also got a lifelong restraining order, because the first one worked so well. Non-fatal strangulation was not a crime at the time, so in the end, he was found guilty of 4 times R and 1 time actual bodily harm. Why they only charged him with 4 Rs and 1 count of ABH, I'll never understand, but I'm grateful I was believed and he was convicted. Rotten hell, Matthew. When I was in high school, I found out another student was planning a school shooting, complete with homemade bombs to help kill as many students as possible, and that the shooting was planned to take place in 2 days. Don't ask me how I knew, because if God forbid he or any of his immediate family members are on Reddit and were to read this, he could figure out it was me by my description of how I found it. He's out of prison now, but he doesn't know it was me who went to the police, and it wouldn't put it past him to come find and hurt me. He lives in the area. I went home and told my mom, and we went to the police station and I told him everything. It's not a huge suburb, and everybody knows everybody, so I told the cops his exact address and even his parents' names. The cops went to his house and raided his bedroom. Under his bed and his closet were enough guns and ammo to survive the zombie apocalypse, plus several finished homemade bombs. They found chains and padlocks. They even found a folder full of papers. One paper was basically a manifesto explaining why he'd chosen to kill us all. The other papers were hand-drawn plans of the school, complete with arrows and labels and notes showing the exits he'd block off using chains and padlocks, which door he'd enter through, which room he'd start shooting first, what time it would happen, and the date it would happen. Again, 2 days from then, as I'd already known. I only know the rest of these details because the city newspaper published pictures of all his papers. He wound up with 5 years in prison. All the kids at school were talking amongst themselves, trying to figure out, and who found out, what he was going to do and call the police. My mom and I kept our mouths shut, again because we were afraid that when he got out, he may come for us for getting him thrown in prison. To this day, nobody knows it was me, and I intend to keep it that way. That was a pretty elaborate plan, and sounds like he was really gonna do it. So, good for you and your family. Sucks that you have to live in fear of retaliation, but, I mean, you gave a lot of details, so that guy should rot. Back in 2000, I supported a friend whose brother was murdered by his wife. My friend knew she was lying when she told the cops her husband had suicided. He was integral in spurring the investigation and took the stand in her trial. That was one of the most powerful moments I'd ever witnessed. He stayed at my house during the trial because he lived in one city and his brother had been murdered in another where I lived. Dan Rather and other famous journalists were calling my friend and his girlfriend for months. We knew their phones were tapped, so all our conversations had to be guarded unless in person. But the moment that creeped me out the most was when the murderess turned around from the defendant's table and stared me right in the eyes. I was sitting next to the family of the guy murdered, and she knew I was there to support them. The coldness in her eyes shook me to my core. Knowing she would never be free again was my only comfort. Long story, but my ex-wife got a new boyfriend who eventually beat her one day. He got arrested for DV, had a few court dates, etc., but the DA couldn't get a prosecution without her testifying against him, which she didn't want to do. She would go to court to defend him and ask that the protective order be removed. It wasn't, but that didn't keep them from breaking the protective order. I was still involved in her life at the time, mostly to be around my dogs, but also because I was still on the mortgage for the house. She lost her job around that time and took a while to assume the mortgage. She had no idea I knew about the DV arrest. I spent a lot of time gathering info, mostly to protect myself, but also in case I needed it. Earlier this year, the DA reached out to me. She wasn't responding to any of their summons to appear in court. By this time, I had custody of one of the dogs and I was off the mortgage. They wanted my help to get her out in person to be served. So I told her our dog was dying and asked if she wanted to be there when I put him down. Before you get mad at me for this, realize two things. I don't give a shit what you think, and my ex-wife was abusive as F. Monetarily, physically, emotionally, you name it. So I worked with the DA and cops to come up with a vet clinic to meet her at. She showed up, the cops met her, and served her, and then arrested her for some other shit that went down that I didn't know about. At this point, she had really gone overboard with avoiding being served, even listing the house for sale with the realtor to convincingly claim she didn't live there, even though I had proof for the DA that she'd been there the whole time. In the end, she got arrested and refused to testify, and both her cases got dropped. But it was fun to go there one last time. I sent my molester to jail. It involved a sting operation with a wiretapped phone where I had to elicit his confession. That was the scariest part, until having to face him in court. I was 13 when the assaults began. He was 36. It lasted 4 years. While my identity was not disclosed during the trial as I was a minor, our mutual friends knew it was my fault he was getting put away. I was victim blamed and then shunned. I wrestled for years with the guilt of having ruined his life without considering the full impact he had on mine. He served a sentence of only 6 months. My detectives called me that day he was released. I became incredibly paranoid, thinking he would retaliate against me, so I began carrying a box cutter everywhere I went. Thankfully, nowadays, the memories of these horrible nights we spent together only come up about once a year and make me melancholy for a few days. But I did want to say, for anyone hopping on this thread, thinking that having someone who harmed you arrested would be a sigh of relief, it didn't feel like that at all. I had nightmares and delusions for years, and still occasionally run my fingers over the scars. I sat on a jury for a case that came about for a guy accused of assaulting his girlfriend, stealing from his girlfriend, running from the cops, and physically assaulting the cop. Most of the evidence was he said, she said type stuff, except for the squad car camera that had the audio of the verbal outburst from the accused as he was being arrested when he headbutted the cop. Then at one point during the trial, the guy had the not-so-good sense to have a verbal outburst at the judge in the same tone and vocal inflections as what was on the recording, creating a confirmation beyond a reasonable doubt to most of us on the jury that the audio from the squad car was the same guy beyond a reasonable doubt. The consensus in the jury room was had he not had that outburst, we would have probably voted not guilty, since there was really nothing on the tape or from eyewitnesses to help corroborate the story the prosecution was telling, beyond the cop's testimony on the stand, since the girlfriend didn't show up until he helped prove the prosecution's case in open court. Instead, he got 5 years. Keep your mouth shut when dealing with the cops, folks, and listen to your lawyer. I think this counts. I am an emergency dispatcher, have been for 16 years. During my rookie years, I get a call from a guy around 1800 who got home and found his wife and baby daughter gone, wanted to report them missing. Phone and purse were left behind. He claimed there was a sign of a struggle, just some mess in the house, and he had no idea what happened or where they went, as the wife didn't work and they had only the baby. As I'm helping him in getting info to start a call, I developed rapport with him. Very nice guy, funny, was in the army and everything. So I, being a veteran, just talked about stuff while I was searching our calls and getting in touch with other agencies to see if they had anything. Eventually I had to put him on hold, and that's when I found out his wife and baby were at a local children's hospital because the baby had been SA'd by him. I felt so sick and deceived, and several law enforcement agencies were fixing to gear up and go get him. They tried to get in touch with his command, and they tried calling him, etc., to no avail. So on a whim, I get back on the line with him, and I make up a BS story about needing to get more info and acting like my computer is lagging and blah blah blah. Basically stalling. While in CAD, I was letting the sergeant know what's going on. I convinced him to go out to his car to get the VIN number to her vehicle off his insurance policy to see if maybe it was towed or something. Then while he went outside, he was arrested. No need for SWAT or anything. Sister's ex went nuclear after she kicked him out for not paying rent and stalked me, my sister, and our parents for about a year. He'd hide in the bushes daily outside our apartment and text us, describing what we're doing and how he'd shoot us or set our house on fire. We live in the same building. He was a violent and armed criminal, and I slept with a baseball bat next to my bed for years afterwards. I lived on the bottom floor and had to live with the fact that he could shoot me through a window at any time, or walk straight into my bedroom and shoot me in my bed. Long story, but my apartment had a door missing, so he could just walk right in. Only way to access my sister's apartment. Had to testify against him in court when they finally caught him for 9 months of death threats and stalking that made me drop out of uni and develop crippling insomnia, and he got 6 months in prison. Our restraining order against him was denied. He also ended up owing us about $500 each in damages. It took about 3 years to get, since he had no assets to his name. It's been 8 years now, and I've been in constant fight-or-flight mode since then, and unable to sleep. Don't really feel like justice was served, to be honest. My niece was groomed, and there were plans for her groomer to come and kidnap her. We learned through her school friends and then adults who the friends informed that my niece had been groomed very thoroughly. The groomer had her installing apps and deleting apps, setting timers at odd hours of the night so she would call him, filming herself and more. We got very, very lucky to learn this. Many of her friends thought she was joking for a long time about having an older boyfriend. After we learned this, my sister-in-law took my niece's phone, and of course, all of us aunties and uncles were trying to sort out how best to protect her. My niece had given this guy her real address, the name of her school, and so much information. Luckily, she also had a single screenshot of the groomer's avatar and his handle saved on her phone. With my old skills from underwriting and research, I pulled a lot of info on this guy as fast as I could. His address, phone numbers, his work, his parents' address, and so much more. This I then sent to Interpol, the FBI, and the local authorities in the groomer's county. Meanwhile, my niece and sister-in-law made a local report here with the data I had compiled. It took a few months, but the guy was caught. We learned that he tried to destroy his devices and make a run for it, but he'd been swarmed by police. He'd groomed several girls, had hundreds of saved images of underage girls, and he'd his own children from around the same ages as my niece. He also R'd a mentally disabled minor who was on his work route and had a lot of other terrible things on record. He's now serving life without parole, and my niece is long grown. So while this nightmare of a chapter in life was closed, the damage was done. A lot of therapy and a lot of work had been put in to ensure my niece remains healthy and well. But it is forever something we had to keep an eye on, as she struggled with mental health, anxiety, and depression ever since. My niece was 8 when the grooming began. It ended when she was 11. It turned out that the groomer had indeed bought plane tickets and was planning to come abroad to violate her. Without that screenshot, I dread to think of what could have happened.